Good morning. My name is Niki Ashton. I'm the Member of Parliament for Churchill, Kuwait, Nokoski, and the NDP critic for Tax Fairness. I'm joined here today with my colleague Alexandre Boulerice, the MP for Rosemont-La Petite Patrie, and the NDP critic on housing. And we are honored to be here with Katrina Miller, who's joining us online, the Executive Director of Canadians for Tax Fairness, as well as Sharon Katz, member of ACORN, the National Tenants Union that represents low to moderate income Canadians, often in rental housing, experiencing our national housing crisis firsthand. We have a housing crisis in Canada. Many young Canadians, working class Canadians, families are worried they will be forever priced out of the housing market. All the while, they're seeing rich investors outbidding them for family homes, and they know that the housing market is rigged against them. 2023 was a record for the growth in income inequality between the richest and the poorest in Canada. And the housing crisis is fueling that divide. The top 1% pay only 23.6% of their income in taxes, enjoying the lowest tax rates of anyone. The rich in Canada today have never had it so good. We can't solve the housing crisis without understanding how it was created. And we must be clear that this housing crisis didn't just happen. The report put out by Canadians for Tax Fairness is shocking. It points to how successive Liberal and Conservative governments brought us to this point, that they in fact engineered the housing crisis we face today. It's been a crisis in the making, not just for the last 10 years, but over the last 30 years. It's Liberals and Conservatives who wrote the rules and built a housing market that is great for rich investors, great for billionaires, that makes billions in profits, but it doesn't work for Canadians. Liberals and Conservatives encouraged the financialization of the housing market. In other words, they allowed housing to turn into cash cows for corporate investors and rich investors instead of homes for Canadian families who desperately need them. Not only that, but they also let rich developers get away with paying very little tax. By handing out billions of dollars in tax breaks to wealthy real estate giants, successive Liberal and Conservative governments priced working-class Canadians out of the housing market. The disastrous capital gains tax exemptions that allowed billionaires to get out of paying taxes have led us to this point. I'm proud of the work that we in the NDP have done to use our power to fix part of this problem. But the reality is, we desperately need to see political will from the Liberals right now when it comes to fixing the full problem. Instead of having the government build housing, Liberals and Conservatives have outsourced the job to rich developers. People like Donald Trump, the Canadian version, who, surprise, surprise, only care about their bottom line. On the other hand, we have Pierre Poilievre, who likes to pretend that this is just a recent problem, that the housing crisis just happened. But the truth is that the housing crisis has been decades in the making, including when he was the housing minister as part of the previous Stephen Harper government. It was under his watch, when he was a cabinet minister, where he continued the tax breaks to corporate developers that have squeezed Canadians when it comes to housing. While rents spiral out of control, the real estate sector collected $50.4 billion in profits in 2023. $50.4 billion in profits. Shocking. At a time when so many renters cannot afford their basic necessities. We need to be clear that this didn't just happen. Working Canadians have been outbid by corporations who've turned around, flipped houses just to make a quick buck. And this was encouraged by Liberal and Conservative decisions. The reality is that the majority purchasers of multifamily dwellings are banks, not Canadian families. This is a structural issue. Housing should be treated as a human right, not a way for rich investors to make a quick buck while Canadians are pushed out of safe and affordable homes. For us in the NDP, we will treat housing for what it is, a human right, prioritizing the need for affordable rents, for affordable homes, instead of making housing an issue of cash cow for the rich. We in the NDP have proposed a bold plan, building a different type of housing market, one that puts people before profits. And this report, put forward by Canadians for Tax Fairness, makes one thing very clear. We cannot solve the housing crisis by giving more tax breaks to the rich, to rich developers, helping the banks. As housing costs rise, the rich are getting richer and working Canadians are left behind. It's time to rethink the way we treat housing in Canada. Canadians are asking for us to rethink and act urgently when it comes to housing in Canada. We need to start by closing the tax loopholes and stop the financialization of housing that has created this crisis in the first place. And we urgently need to invest in public and non-market housing units, including co-ops, housing operated by not-for-profit providers, and social housing. We need to have broad implemented rent control policies, including vacancy control. And we need to limit ownership of rental housing by large corporate landlords, as is done elsewhere. At the end of the day, the NDP stands ready to fight for these bold changes, to stand up for Canadians who are living the housing crisis now. We're going to hear more about these solutions, and I want to call on my colleague Alexandre Boulerice, our housing critic, to share some words now.
Merci beaucoup, Niki. Bonjour tout le monde. Alexandre Boulerice, député de Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie et porte-parole en matière de logement pour le NPD. Effectivement, Niki a raison. On vit une très grave crise du logement en ce moment. Beaucoup de gens sont victimes de rénoviction. Beaucoup de gens se ramassent à la rue. Beaucoup de gens sont forcés de déménager parce qu'ils sont plus capables de se payer le loyer. Beaucoup de gens pensent qu'ils ne pourront jamais devenir propriétaires d'une maison parce que les prix sont trop élevés. Il y a des gens qui sont inquiets partout. Il y a des gens qui sont mal logés, des gens qui restent dans des appartements avec des moisissures, avec des champignons. Il y a des gens qui sont forcés d'avoir des colocs parce que c'est la seule manière d'être capable de payer le loyer à la fin du mois. Les gens sont extrêmement inquiets et souffrent en ce moment. Mais cette crise du logement-là, elle n'est pas tombée du ciel. C'est pas par hasard. Ça a été causé. Ça a été provoqué par des mauvaises décisions gouvernementales ou l'absence de décisions gouvernementales. Trois choses. La première chose, c'est le désengagement du gouvernement fédéral dans les années 90 pour financer des logements qui sont vraiment abordables. Financer des coopératives, financer du logement social, financer du logement communautaire. Cet abandon du gouvernement fédéral a été le début de cette crise-là dont on souffre aujourd'hui puis qu'on voit aujourd'hui les conséquences. La deuxième chose, c'est le phénomène qu'on appelle la financiarisation du marché puis du parc immobilier. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? Ça veut dire qu'au lieu que ce soit des gens puis des familles ou des jeunes couples qui s'achètent une maison ou un appartement ou un condo, mais maintenant, c'est des fonds d'investissement. C'est des investisseurs, c'est des trusts qui achètent des centaines puis des milliers de portes, comme on appelle, que ce soit des maisons, des appartements ou des condos. Dans les années 90, les fonds d'investissement avaient à peu près 0 porte dans le marché immobilier. Aujourd'hui, c'est 20 %. Une porte sur 5 n'est pas la propriété d'un Québécois ou d'un Canadien, mais d'un fonds d'investissement dont le seul but dans la vie est de faire le maximum de profit le plus vite possible. Alors, évidemment, ça met de la pression sur la hausse des prix puis la hausse des loyers. Et les gouvernements fédéraux, libéraux ou conservateurs, ont laissé ça aller pendant des années. Et troisième chose, et ça, c'est la cerise sur le gâteau aujourd'hui, c'est que le rapport qu'on vous présente nous dit qu'en plus de ça, le régime fiscal donne des avantages à ces fonds d'investissement qui ne payent pas leur juste part d'impôts. Alors, ce qu'on demande, c'est qu'au moins, enlever cet échappatoire fiscal qui fait en sorte que ces grands fonds d'investissement dans l'immobilier ne payent pas leur juste part d'impôts comme les autres entreprises ou comme monsieur, madame, tout le monde, puis les travailleurs et les travailleuses de ce pays-là. Si les libéraux sont sérieux pour empêcher ces grands trusts et fonds d'investissement de faire un maximum de profit, il faut au moins, à tout le moins, enlever cet échappatoire fiscal parce que sinon, ça va juste accélérer le phénomène puis amplifier le problème pour les Québécois et les Canadiens. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Alexandre. Next, we will go to Katrina Miller, the Executive Director of Canadians for Tax Fairness, who released this groundbreaking report. Hello, Katrina.
Hello, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you today on this important issue. We did release a report that clearly showed that our tax system and the tax breaks that it offers for financialized landlords is hurting our goal of having affordable housing in Canada. In 2023, we saw average rents rise by 8%, while our inflation rate and wages only went up about 5%. As mentioned, during that same year, the real estate sector walked away with $50 billion in profits. That's 40% higher than its pre-pandemic norm. And what we're seeing in our research is that these real estate investors that are financialized firms like real estate investment trusts or equity firms are using capital gains as an increasing source of income for a couple of reasons. One, they have a tax break on capital gains. Two, some of these firms, particularly real estate investment trusts, have an exemption for any corporate income that they gain. So these two tax breaks in particular are driving these financialized landlords to buy up more and more of our housing stock and to use it as an asset, increasing rents in order to both increase the income they get from rents as well as the asset price when they decide to sell. These financialized landlords now own a quarter of all our purpose-built rental and are the major purchases right now. So unless we close down these loopholes, we're going to see these financialized landlords own more and more of our housing stock and drive our rents to more and more unaffordable prices. This is why we have 3 recommendations for the government. One is to fully close the capital gains loophole and include all capital gains income as taxable income that's inflation adjusted, especially for the real estate sector. The second is to end the exemption that real estate investment trusts get right now on their corporate income tax. For example, Canada's 7 top real estate investment trust companies transferred $100 million of income tax-free to their investors. Neither the corporation nor the investor paid any tax on that $100 million in 2022. And that was by using both the capital gains tax break and the real estate investment trust tax exemption to basically grab that income from Canada with no taxes paid. We need that revenue back in order to pay for our affordable housing plans, in order to build non-market housing. These tax breaks don't help build housing. REITs don't build housing. They simply buy housing that's already been built, increase its value in order to sell it at a higher price. If we want to have a tax system that benefits our affordable housing plans, we need to shut down these loopholes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katrina. And next, we'll hear from Sharon Katz from ACORN.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting ACORN to speak today. My name is Sharon Katz, and I'm a member of ACORN Canada. ACORN is a national independent organization of low to moderate income people. Our members are largely tenants who are bearing the brunt of the housing crisis, which is getting worse by the day. Many of our members live in housing that is owned by REITs or other types of financialized landlords. Financialized landlords are maximizing profits for the few by squeezing tenants out of the only affordable housing that is left. These big corporations earn huge profits through increased turnover rates, meaning replacing long-term tenants with new ones at higher rents. Once financialized landlords buy apartment buildings, they often allow them to fall into disrepair so that they can force the existing tenants out by using tactics like rent evictions, demevictions, major rent increases, and others. If a tenant is forced out, they have nowhere else to go. Data from CMHC shows the share of affordable units for low-income households is less than 5% in major city centres, 1% in Vancouver, and almost 0% in Ontario cities. Canada's public, non-market, and affordable housing stock is now among the lowest of OECD countries at 3.5%. Families and individuals end up making larger and larger sacrifices to pay inflated rents. They spend less on groceries and medications, neglect paying other bills, dip into savings, or go further into debt. If a tenant resists and is able to stay, it doesn't mean they're lucky. What we're seeing on the ground through daily door knocking and phone calls, surveys, and regular tenant meetings is that long-term tenants with lower rents are less likely to get repairs or maintenance. They're also forced to live with bedbugs, cockroaches, mold, and more. Rent increases every year come consistently. Especially in Ontario, tenants report getting above guideline increases back to back. Tenants often express stress and anxiety, negative impacts on themselves and their children, fear of displacement, and the inability to find adequate housing. REITs shouldn't be getting preferential tax treatment for making things worse for tenants. This is why ACORN Canada is demanding the following to rein in these REITs. 1. The federal government must stop apartment sales to corporate landlords. In Berlin, for example, corporations cannot own more than 3,000 apartment suites. 2. Ensure the acquisition fund set up by the federal government is adequately funded and enables land trusts, co-ops, tenants, and nonprofits to purchase affordable rental buildings when they come on the market. 3. Ensure right of first refusal for land trusts, co-ops, tenants, and nonprofits so that they have the first opportunity to acquire apartment buildings that are for sale. The City of Montreal exercises the right of first refusal, which grants the city priority to purchase certain buildings and land ahead of other buyers. This should be nationalized. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Sharon Katz from ACORN. What you've heard clearly today is that this housing crisis didn't just happen. It is the result of liberal and conservative policies that have not only failed to invest in public non-market housing, but have also created tax incentives to allow for billionaires, rich investors, trust funds, the banks, to take advantage and shape a housing market that benefits them at the expense of working Canadians, at the expense of young people, at the expense of Canadian families who are living the housing crisis right now. We are calling for concrete changes, very much rooted in the report that the groundbreaking report you've heard about here today from Canadians for Tax Fairness, and very much reflective of the message we've heard from ACORN that there is a crisis that demands urgent action now, and that there are tangible solutions to look to. What we need is political will.